Good morning. My names are Vincent Onyancha Ongwai, GPR 3149545 stroke 2025, Nairobi University. I'm going to make a presentation on analysis of the single story as said by Chimamanda, Danger of a Single Story. First and foremost, I wish to point out that this is a very important concept for legal practitioners since it underscores unbiasedness interpretation in legal matters. For example, she has talked about when they had a houseboy in the house, the mother always depicted them as poor. This stereotyping, as illustrated by Pennington, 1983. Pennington talked about 3 characteristics of stereotypes where you only see someone's story from the traits of that person, if it is the tribe, if it is the race, and also looking at the homogeneity of that person, the oneness that is seen, hence grouping that person and making attributes that represent a larger group. This is wrong, and as legal practitioners, you will not win a case successfully because you are biased. In analysis of The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda, one important thing that legal practitioners need to look at is to challenge biasness in decision making. We have to look at a multiple source of a story in order to make analysis out of it. The second one is to develop a complete client narrative. When you have a client you are presenting in court, it is important to listen to all corners of the story as opposed to only one part of the story. This is very important because you have a large depth of information to make an analysis from, hence it becomes easier to connect. The third one is critical analysis of facts. In the Chimamanda story, the houseboy was labeled as poor, but when she went to their home, she could not connect the poor thing she had had. Instead, she saw a rich artifact in the house that probably could have been sold and used for other income-generating activities. It is very important at this juncture to also elaborate that when she was in the US, Chimamanda's roommate always was surprised by how she was eloquent in English and how she was able to do her things not as the African way, yet the roommate knew Africans are known to be problematic. So as legal practitioners, the fourth item we have to look at is ethical obligation on the use of power responsibly. We have to ensure that we have to inculcate various issues into one so that we do not run into the danger of being biased in our client services. The other one is empathetic communication. It's important to listen carefully, and it is important to bring all the facts at hand in order to get to know what is being talked about. it was very clear that Chimamanda always thought that it is the British and the Americans who were able to write stories until she saw the write-up of one Chinua Achebe that actually inspired her into becoming an author, and that is how we as students today are appreciating her works in legal research and writing. The last one is we need to be advocates for the marginalized voices. One thing that comes out very clearly is that if you rely on one story, you are unlikely to represent your clients well. You need a various and wide source of stories or wide information that will be able to address your needs. In my last slide is the members who were in the group, and I wish to take this opportunity to thank Professor Sarah Kinyanjui for giving us an opportunity to learn about this story and also answer the questions as instructed in the Google Classroom. Thank you very much.
My name is Gadi Kanyi, first year law student at Backlands campus. My admission number is GPR3 stroke 15 08 75 stroke 2025. I am attempting to address assignment in continuous assessment test 1 that is based on Chimamanda Ngozi's video of the danger of a single story. And I want to situate this in our legal background or context. And based on the video, I want to address the need to engage in a sound analysis of issues informed through research. As we are aware, Kenya uses a mixed legal system, primarily based on English common law from its colonial past. The system emphasizes precedent and adversarial procedures. Prosecution and defense actively gather and present their own evidence. A judge or jury listens to both sides and decides the verdict based solely on the presented evidence. Lawyers play an aggressive role, presenting the best case for their clients, challenging opposing evidence, and ensuring procedural rules are followed. In absence of sound analysis of issues, chances are that the justice will not be served, since the jury may rely on incomplete information that may not necessarily be true. Our legal system that relies on stare decisis can heavily be impacted negatively if we rely on a single story, because without doing thorough research or thorough analysis, we may not appreciate the specific context and nuances that differentiate one scenario from another. Generalizations, as a result, will fail to account for these differences, often leading to a one-size-fits-all approach that is rarely optimal. Thank you.
My name is Abdulaziz Mohammed, admission number GPR 3150062/2025. If I could add and contribute on the ongoing discussion of the danger of a single story, topic or rather story discussed by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie Ncheto, and at the same time intrinsically link this to the importance of, or the essentiality of sound legal analysis and research. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, in The Danger of a Single Story, she warns that relying on one narrative creates incomplete truths and at the same time harmful stereotypes. In law, a single story may mean, accepting one version of facts, or law without scrutiny. As lawyers, then this is dangerous because legal disputes are complex and involve, competing rights, the interests, and at the same time interpretation. In legal practice, then, facts are rarely straightforward. If a lawyer relies only on one witness account or a client's version of events, they risk misleading them the court. Data research then and investigation help lawyers test evidence and evaluate the credibility and at the same time uncover the alternative explanation. And this ensures that legal arguments are balanced and consistent with the principle of fairness and legality at the same time and justice under Article 50 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. A single story can also arise in legal interpretation, depending on one case or study without broader research may lead them to incorrect conclusions. Because this, is what the single story means. So the Kenyan courts emphasize contextual interpretation of the law, considering constitutional values under Article 10, and sound research enables then, lawyers to identify the relevant precedents, then distinguish, cases and align arguments with the constitutional principles such as the rule of law and human dignity at the same time. And Dichie argues that a single story robs people of dignity. Similarly, this is what happens when a lawyer doesn't, go far beyond a single story, because inadequate legal research can deny litigants justice. Lawyers have an ethical duty to assist the court through accurate, well-researched argument. And by engaging the multiple sources, the case law, both the primary sources and the secondary sources, lawyers then protect the integrity of the legal system. In conclusion, Chimamanda and DTS message then reminds us that truth is complex, and for lawyers, sound legal analysis informed by thorough research is essential to avoid injustice, uphold constitutional values, and even promote fairness. So rejecting the single story allows the lawyers to serve its, two purpose, justice for all. Thank you. Nice.
Father Vincent Opuba Onyango, admission number GPR3 149 853 2025. I'm tackling the legal research writing assignment 1, which gives out a descriptive aspect of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie 2009 TED Talk on the danger of a single story. By definition, a single story is a stereotype understanding of a particular group, race, or culture of a community. And these stories, if told in a very good way, they can help humanizing or empowering the people. But if they are told in a bad way, then they can end up dispossessing or maligning a particular community group. So in analysis, Chimamanda states that these stories have transformed her to what she is today. And we should know that stereotypes are untrue and they are also incomplete. Single stories robs the dignity of our people. And it makes also recognition of our equal humanity very difficult. Single stories also emphasizes on our differences rather than our similarity. There are painful moments which Chimamanda Adichie encountered. One is like the inadequate health care, which led to the death of her cousin Paule. And secondly, the closest friend, Okoloma, who died in a plane crash because fire trucks had no water to extinguish it. Bearing from the story of Chimamanda also, she grew during the regime, during the military regime. So that one affected negatively in her psychological way of perceiving how Nigeria as a state was at that time. she also experienced horrific. She also read stories about horrific rape cases in Congo, and and also the fact that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie could see how many talented Nigerian citizens were, but they did not have they were not having a leeway of employment. In a case in an instance where 5,000 people applied for one job. Nigeria also has a positive element, which says there is Fumi Liandi, who is a very talented TV show, talented television show who tells captivating stories. Nigeria has talented musicians, and also the recent medical heart transplant which happened in Lagos Hospital. She also recounts of a female lawyer who challenged a ridiculous law which required women to get their husband consent before renewing their passport. She also says Nigerian film industry captivate audiences globally. So Chimamanda Adichie offers advice that we need to consider a balance of stories, for instance, immigration debates between USA and Mexico. Africa should have a television network which encourages to broadcast diverse African stories worldwide. So what she did to change the narrative, Chimamanda taught writing workshops in Lagos every summer and started a Farafina Trust with Muhtar Bahari, a non-profit organization. She also participated in building libraries and refurbishing the ones that exist and provided books for state schools. She organized workshops in reading and writing for people who are eager to tell stories. So in conclusion, these stories, if told in an unbiased way, they enriches the people. So Nigeria has a positivity element which was not known by her roommate. So lastly, she recounts of an American writer, Alice Walker, who changed the perception of his relatives who had moved to the North by making them read the book explaining the history of the Southern people. So Chimamanda is truly convinced that by rejecting the single story or realize that no place or people can be categorized by a single story, then we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
My name is Clara Mutanda. I'm a first-year law student at the University of Nairobi, Faculty of Law, Parklands campus. Registration number GPR3/150596/2025. I would like to contribute to the ongoing discussion on the dangers of single stories based on the talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie at the TED Global event held in July of 2009. In her talk, she highlights her experience with single stories and their impact. Single stories present single understanding and expression of issues. They define default assumptions and dictate stereotypes from a single point of view. Single stories emphasize on the negatives and variances rather than similarities, in so doing, erasing some truths. They dehumanize and strip off power. Often, what is presented in the media and publicized are single stories, not anchored on research and analysis, but perceptions and narratives projecting views and interests of the authors. On the contrary, research and multiple stories highlight all-encompassing presentations of facts on issues in various spheres of life. For example, in Kenya, the judiciary is mourn over allegations of rampant corruption, interference by the executive, political elites, the rich, and case backlogs. Little is known about the gains and the efforts being made by the judiciary to address case backlogs, such as hiring of new staff, service weeks, and case management innovations. Also, the judiciary has integrated technology in its operations to increase efficiency and accessibility, such as case tracking systems, virtual court hearing, and e-filing. This initiative has been applauded across the continent, and we have instances of governments that are coming to benchmark in Kenya, such as the government of Zambia through its Ministry of justice. In conclusion, presently as students of law and in future as lawyers, whether in practice, academia, or in the developmental world, we are expected to present multiple sides of the same stories, supported by research when analyzing issues. Thank you.
My name is Valentine Jepkosgei, student number GPR3 15972 2025. Allow me to add my comments on The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi. In her story, she talks about the impacts and the consequences that a single story has on humanity. This story is very relevant to us as legal professionals and in our legal profession. When I finished high school, I wanted to be a lawyer. One of my church members told me that you cannot be a lawyer because you will not go to heaven, that lawyers lie the entire of their lives. I made a decision not to join law because of that single story, only to find out the contrary. That's why I'm here today. This single story is very relevant to our work, the work of our courts, that the judicial system or legal profession ought to provide justice, uphold human dignity and equity. And many a times we find that there are cases that illustrates convictions due to single stories leading to losses by the relevant parties and so many other negative consequences. If you go back to my story of not doing law, how many people like me or students like me are impacted by the kind of stories outside there about legal profession? In a case of defamation of Cecil Barrier Nation Media, the aspect of defamation comes out as a single story, and it affects the brand of individual people, the brand of companies, and affects families. And in that case, affects generation, affects society. So in my conclusion, there is need to have the other side of the story before we make decisions. That the effects of single stories can be dire and you might not reverse. So it is important to be cautious of single stories, single witnesses, which most of the time have power. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Usi, admission GPR 3 150 133 2025, and here is my explanation as to why it is necessary to engage in a sound analysis of issues found by thorough research, especially as a lawyer, and in regards to The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So in her story, Chimamanda explains that she grew up reading mostly American and British books. Hence, at a young age, she was exposed to single narratives that shaped her imagination and self-perception. Same as to when she went to the United States for her studies, she met her roommate who had never been to Africa. Yet she thought that Africa was a place full of poverty and catastrophes. And genuinely, her perception was not out of malice rather than a dominant story. Chimamanda warns that when we hear only one version of the story, we risk misunderstanding people, realities, or even events. So, a single story flattens complexity, it creates stereotypes, and often serves the interests of those with power. This idea directly explains why sound analysis grounded in thorough research is essential, especially in the legal profession. A single story leads to distortion of judgment, and Chimamanda explains that even though stereotypes aren't necessarily false, they are incomplete. So as a lawyer, relying on one narrative, whether it's from your client or from the police or the media, can result to injustice. A lawyer who fails to interrogate all sides risks accepting assumptions as facts. Thorough research allows lawyers to make decisions that are based on evidence rather than partial truths. In conclusion, a lawyer must actively seek multiple perspectives, interrogate dominant stories, and ground argument in thorough research to avoid injustice, uphold professional integrity, and serve the true purpose of the law. Thank you.
My name is Ian Sherry, admission GPR 3148995 2024. Module 2 evening class, Nairobi University, Faculty of Law. Assignment: The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. First and foremost, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie gives us a narration of her life from childhood. She systematically narrates how her cognitive development as a child was nurtured by the environment. By so saying, her environment was constructed by the people around her and mostly the books that she read as a child. She got a different view of people around her, including her parents and the people who lived in her house, as non-relatives. And that gave her only one side of the story from her parents. She later came to understand things differently as she grew up. To say the least and summarize her story, as she grew up and she went to the university far away from home in the US, her perception about life in general and the people mostly was from the books that she read. Surprisingly, the people she met there, including her roommate, had also a different insight of her from the books and what she heard from other people. So it was a time of mixed reactions from both the two girls on how they viewed life. Therefore, as a lawyer, I take up this issue to synthesize the dangers of a single story in a matter. Lawyers have been given the opportunity to be mirrors of the society. And I come to an implicable conclusion that a single story is dangerous. As a lawyer trained, as a matter of fact, our activities in the society are governed by rules. In so saying, I say that administration of justice is relevant in the legal profession mainly through principles, statutes, and even case laws. But all these tools should be used with a deeper sense of research. When I look at research gives us a multifaceted approach in order to eliminate any bias from our stories. Therefore, a single story always ends up portraying a one side of an issue, and an irrevocable application of the law relies on thorough research aiming to bring out the two sides. To give an example, as a law student, Article 50 of the Kenyan Constitution states that a person is assumed innocent until proven guilty. And this presumption of innocence gives all the stakeholders, both the bar and the bench, the opportunity to research both sides of the story or the case and come up with a good defense or serve justice where it is deserved. The principle of fairness, as I come to conclusion, is a tool that is used to serve justice. It will be a fallacy if an adoption of one side of a story can be assumed to, at the end, give a conclusive result. Therefore, in conclusion, I recommend that lawyers should always analyze issues in both sides in order to get clarity and conscious answers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Veronica Mungai. My registration number is GPR3 14 99 72 2025. I'd like to highlight why it's necessary for us to engage in sound analysis of issues informed by thorough research, and this is most especially for lawyers. This is based on Chimamanda Ngozi's video on the danger of a single story. She describes a single story as a narrative that presents only one perspective, repeated again and again, making that one story the only story, which then creates an incomplete, stereotypical, and unjust outcome. I'd like to share my own experience of a case for which for a very long time I'd had a single story perspective. This is the case of the state versus Naftali Kinuthia, which is criminal case 31 of 2019. When this case first appeared in the media, I formed an opinion based on what was being reported by the media. Various news outlets, including YouTube channels, and basically everything you were finding online was suggesting that the deceased had used the accused for money and was involved with another lover despite being in a romantic relationship with the accused. This was then used as the reason why the accused had decided to commit the heinous act of ending the deceased's life. This version of that story was repeated widely in the whole country, creating a one-sided and misleading picture of the events of the people involved. At the time, I accepted this as the truth. I did not examine actual case files, neither the witness statements or the material facts that were presented in court. I believed that one narrative without questioning it or seeking the full context. My understanding of the situation was solely shaped and was entirely shaped by the media and what the media was reporting at the time. It was only recently, in December of 2025, which is 7 years later, you can imagine 7 years, that I took time to study the case. I looked at the material facts of the case. I looked at the police files. I looked at the police reports, the evidence presented during the trial, and the court judgment, that I realized how incomplete and misleading the media narrative had been. This evidence told a more nuanced story, one that could not be reduced to a simple cause and effect explanation or a stereotype about the characters involved.
This experience, which again very recent, made me deeply aware of what Chimamanda Ngozi describes as the danger of a single story. In my case, it almost led me to accept a false narrative about a person's life, their intentions, and their character, which is a reminder to lawyers, to all lawyers, to carry, since we carry the responsibility of seeking the full truth. You cannot afford to rely on one narrative, no matter how persuasive or widely shared it may be. Engaging in thorough research and sound analysis is not just an academic exercise. It is the center of our profession, of our professional integrity. In conclusion, Chimamanda Ngozi's message is highly relevant to the legal practice. As lawyers, we must go beyond the surface level narratives, challenge our own assumptions, like in my case, I'd already formed an assumption, and ensure that our opinions and actions are based on thorough research and careful analysis. The single story is tempting. Why? Because it is simple and it's persuasive, but rarely is it accurate. Avoiding it is essential to upholding justice, fairness, and professional integrity. Thank you.